get my file menu ready.
All right, so I'm going to go to my P drive. I'm going to delete the 2016 folder. I'm going to go to my folder, 2510, work. Oops, not work, right there. I'm going to copy my 2016 folder and paste it onto the P drive. Someone asked me yesterday about if they have a Mac, are they able to do this same thing? And yes, you can. You can save your preferences from here and use them at home. The only difference is on a Mac, they make it very, very difficult to find where your preferences are. So I could tell you, but the easiest way is just to, when you want to do it, go to Google and type in Maya preferences on a Mac. And you see it's like the first choice, folder on a Mac. Because it's just a really ridiculous spot of where they save them. And it's like users, applications, preferences, system, library, whatever, whatever, whatever. There's where it keeps your preferences. It's like a ridiculous spot. And that's where you have to copy it to. All right. So once I've done that, I can open up Maya, and then I should be good to go. Now, also remember that we never just open our file. We never just double click it and open it. We never go to File, Open, and just open our file. The first thing we need to do, yes, is set our project. Okay? Every single time you come into Maya, you set your project. So under File, I'm going to go to Set Project. And I'm going to tell it which project I'm working on. And this gives you a better, for instance, of what kind of situation you might be in. If you see, I have a mini room for the Monday, Wednesday class, and I have a mini room for the Tuesday, Thursday. So I have to make sure Maya knows which mini room I'm working on. So I have to make sure I click on this mini room folder and then hit Set. And then I can go to File, Open, and open up my mini room 02. And then we wait. All right, now that I've opened my room, what should be the first thing that I do?
Save it.
Save it. Save it as something else, right? That way we have today's starting point. So I'm going to save my scene as 03. Okay. Control A. Okay, so in Maya you hit Control A, and what's going to happen is you get a little pop-up off to the right. So where we had our channel box a second ago, now we have this thing called the Attribute Editor. Okay, all the stuff that we've changed before, like divisions or position or any of that other stuff, it's all listed inside the Attribute Editor. All right, so Control A hides it, Control A brings it back. Now this is kind of annoying to have it pop out of here, because I usually like to have this window just floating and off on my other screen most times. So once it's open, I'm just going to drag it off. So now it's floating. Okay, so just click and drag that top bar, and now it'll be a floating window, and we don't have to worry about it resizing our window every 2 seconds. All right, so now what does it do? If you click on any object in your scene, what you're going to see is that it's going to load the Attribute Editor with items that we have selected. Okay? And depending on what item you have selected is going to control how much stuff is shown inside the Attribute Editor. So for this specific item, which is my chair, there's a lot of different tabs up here. If I click on this desk here, I still have some tabs. I click on the computer screen. If I click on one of these picture frames on the wall, you'll see there's only 4 tabs that show up. Okay? I'm going to click back on one of my other objects, like the chair. All right, so what it's showing me here is all of my history, all the stuff that I have on this object from when I first created it. So if you look, here's the poly bevel that I did. That was like the last thing I did to the chair. And then I tweaked it, meaning I moved some of the vertices around or edges around. I added a split ring. I added another split ring. I tweaked it again, meaning I moved it around again. I added a bridge. Remember when I did the bridge for these pieces right here? So each one of those bridge items is listed right here. I also deleted stuff. I did a bridge. I deleted stuff. I did a bridge. Okay, I extruded. That's how I got the arms up there. I tweaked. Okay, all the way back to where it first started, where it was just a cube, and then it started to adding divisions, and then starting to extrude stuff, and using bridge, and using bevel, and all that other stuff. Okay, so this is all the history items that are involved in that specific item. Now the rule I use is when I like the way this looks and I'm done modeling it, I'm done moving stuff around, I can click our delete history button. Okay? Because there's no reason to keep all that extra stuff, because all the extra stuff is not really needed, because I can't go back and really edit any of these stuff basically like 2 or 3 back, because it would really screw things up. Just so you can see that, if I went back to the very beginning of this and I tried to add another division in here, remember it's going to freak out. Woo! It's a very artistic looking chair. Okay, so there's no reason to have all that stuff. We just need what it looks like right now. Okay, so I delete the history and it's gone. So something like this guy here, I actually spent 3 hours working on him using a lot of different tools. And so for that, my history might be like 100 commands long. And all those commands are just eating up memory. They're not doing anything. They're just eating up my computer and possibly causing this chair to fail at some point. Okay, so imagine that you have a tool inside here. Let's just pretend that it's the crease tool. Okay, so let's say I use the crease tool on this chair. I don't delete history, and then I try to go back to Maya 2013 that doesn't have the crease tool. Maya will freak out. Okay, it won't open your file, it won't do anything. If I delete history and I go back to Maya 2013, then it's fine, because it's basically like locking it in. It's kind of like Photoshop where it flattens all the layers. That's what it's doing for that one specific object. It's just flattening it and saying, that's what you wanted, that's what you have now. Okay? It doesn't mean we can't go through and grab vertices still and tweak things or do extrusions or any of that other stuff. We can still do anything else we want to the chair. It just clears off all that extra junk. All right? All right, so let's look at the other 2 tabs here. One tab on the far left, this is called the Transform tab. And you can tell because it says Transform Attributes right here. And this is what you've typically seen in the channel box. So over on the far right, where it says Translate, Rotate, Scale, Visibility, that's what you're seeing right here. Translate, Rotate, Scale, and then Visibility is under Display right there. Okay, so you can see as I toggle this on and off that it's changing this visibility right here. We also have shear, which is like put it like that, put it like this, and it'll shear the item. In all my years of Maya, I've never used the shear, but it's there in case you needed it. These are like the top 10 things that you will typically use on an item, so that's why they're there. But if I open up all of these things, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of different things that we could use to set inside here. Okay, it's crazy how much stuff we can actually use inside of this specific item. I could even do what's called an override, just so you can see some of the other options, and override this shape with a bounding box. Okay, so imagine I had 7 million chairs in my scene, and my scene is going super slow. I can do an override, which basically says, don't show the chairs. I know where they're at. I know what they look like. Just show a bounding box so I get the idea of how this is working. Okay, so sometimes you'll use stuff like this for certain cases. Sometimes you'll use stuff like this where, let's see, this is the red direction. There we go. So right now I've set a limit on the red. So I can move this in the blue, I can move this in the green. I cannot move it in the red past -1 or +1. Okay? Now this is more of like an animation control. If I had a gear or I had a switch, I only wanted to be able to go this far or that far, I can set a limit so that someone coming in can't accidentally rotate it too far. All right, so again, there's lots of stuff inside here that you could play with, but typically we deal with the top area. All right, so this is the Translate tab, Transform tab. The next tab is the Shape tab. Okay, so imagine that the first tab is basically where it is and how it's rotated and how it's scaled up. Okay, so if you imagine that's what it looks like, or that's where it's positioned in space. This next one is more about what it looks like, what it's composed of. So there are certain things inside here where I could add a smooth mesh preview on here, and you can see how this actually like smoothed out. I'll turn this off, turn it back on. So you can see how it's smoothing out that specific item, and then I'm adding more divisions in here to smooth it out even more. And now it's thinking more because I added a whole bunch of divisions. Okay, so there's certain things that we could add again inside of this window to play with them. Typically, I don't touch these two tabs, hardly ever, okay? There's only certain times I'll play with these two tabs inside here, just because all this information is right here, okay? So there's typically not a reason to go in the attribute editor to play with those two tabs. Now the next tabs are the ones that are important for what we're going to be doing today. Now the first one is the initial shading group, okay? And if you look here, it says surface material Lambert 1. So every item inside Maya is going to have two tabs, okay? It's going to have two properties to it, a transform and a shape node, okay? Transform and shape, they're always going to be with an object. They have to know where it's at and they have to know what it looks like to actually be an object. These two on the far right are connected also. Those two are what the object's coloration looks like, okay? So if this was glass, we would have a certain material on it that makes it look like glass. If it's rock, we would have a certain material that makes it look like rock. So that's what these two are doing. Now for this class, we're typically not going to be playing with any shading group stuff inside of this tab. Most of our work will be done in the farthest right tab, which is the one that has like, what color is this item, okay? Now make sure you tattoo it on your hand. Never touch Lambert 1, okay? Lambert 1 is the default and we don't want to mess with that at all. If we start messing with that shader, everything in our scene will become that color. So if we change this shader to red, every item we make will now be red, and it's really annoying. Okay. Now this is how all the materials are laid out typically. We have color, we have transparency, we have ambient color, incandescence, bump mapping, diffuse, translucence, and then again a whole bunch of stuff below this that we could play with and tweak and modify and whatever else. Okay? There's a lot of stuff that makes glass look like glass. There's a lot of stuff that makes plastic look like plastic and metal look like metal. So all of these properties here are ways for us to kind of coerce the software into making it look like glass or metal or plastic or whatever. The most fundamental one is color, okay? So I don't want to touch Lambert 1 like I said, so I'm going to assign a different material to it. So what I want you to do is I want you to right click on your object and hold, and then go down to the bottom where it says assign favorite material and assign a Lambert to it. Okay, so you right clicked and held, you went all the way down to the bottom to assign favorite material, and then you chose Lambert. Okay, well, Lambert material is something that has zero shininess. All right, most items, like 90% of items in the real world, have some sort of shininess to them. Even my desk has some sort of shininess. Even this monitor screen, or the case for it, has some sort of shininess. This thing has some sort of shininess. That's what gives us an indication as to what the material is. If it's completely flat, there's typically not that many surfaces that have that. All right, so a Lambert has no shininess, so we typically use it for color. You may have to go to the far right if you click on your item and then go all the way to the right tab to get to it. Okay. Now for color, we can click right on this color swatch. So if we click on the color swatch and we pick a color, you can change that specific item's color. Okay. And this is just a flat color. This is just literally what color is this specific item. Is it purple? Is it red? Is it green? Is it blue? What color is this item? Now again, most items don't usually have just a flat coloring that makes them look the way they look. Something like this plastic on the screwdriver here, that is just a flat color. It's just like red. That's what I could use. But
changing all of the colors, not just the selected.
Super close to this screwdriver, we might also see some stuff like little bumps or gouges or scratches or something else that's going to give it a little bit of character to it, okay? The same thing with this metal here. This metal isn't just silver, there's actually like reflection that goes into making this thing look metal. There's also, if you look close, there's like little scuff marks, scratches that are on top of this too that are making this look like metal, okay? So most items are not typically just like a flat color, there's other stuff that goes into creating that. So color is just one of those properties. We also have transparency. So if I crank up the transparency, you'll see that it definitely turns transparent. It's actually turning into a a see-through item, but it's not turning it into glass, okay? This material here, this Lambert, I'm going to jump over to our definitions right here. Lambert is one of our words. It's a basic material used for creating looks for surfaces without a highlight, right? So glass is something that usually has a highlight. It has reflection. It has what's called refraction, okay? Where if we held up a glass and we looked through the glass, the stuff on the other side is kind of distorted and bent. That's what's going to make glass look like glass. This is just transparency. So you remember Tin Toy? When Tin Toy came out, they had this material for some of those items because this worked very quickly. The computers could handle showing that kind of stuff. Some of those items didn't have reflection because it just wasn't important. So we typically don't use Lambert, but just so you can see what it is, this is what it is, okay? There's also ambient color. And anytime we see ambient, it's essentially just like if there were no lights in the room and we pulled the ambient up, that's what the item would look like, okay? So if, just so you can see this, I'm going to show that. I'm turning off my default light, and I'm going to hit the render button. Okay, so here's my scene right now. There's nothing in the scene, okay? Everything's in the scene, but there's no lights. So if I pull my ambient color up, what's going to happen is that chair is now going to glow. But what happens with ambient is that it's from every single direction. The entire surface lights up. So it doesn't look like a 3D chair. It looks more like a vector-y kind of chair, right? So you could actually use something like this to create something that you wanted to look like a vector. I could take the character I have here and put a flat Lambert on him with some ambient, and he'll look like a silhouette. And I could create a very cool look to that one, okay? I typically don't use ambient, though. And then there's incandescence. And incandescence is more of a glow, okay? So in this case, there's not really anything glowing, but if I went down here and turned glow on, there we go, then we would see our chair is now glowing. Again, we typically don't use incandescence like this. We typically don't use glow like this, but they have them there because they're just there from those first years of when Maya was around, okay? Even this Lambert, we don't use Lamberts hardly ever. Like, I can't remember the last time I used one, maybe last semester when I taught and showed people what Lamberts were. All right, so now we're going to right click on our object and we're going to assign a favorite material and we're going to go to blend. Okay, so right click on an object, assign favorite material, and we go to blend. You'll notice that we get two tabs. One of them says blend 1 SG and then the other one says blend 1. Every material is going to have two tabs, the shading group and the material itself. Shading group is just connected to it. Don't worry about it, just know that it's connected to it. We have the same properties. We have color, transparency, ambient, incandescence, bump, diffuse, translucence, the difference in blend is that we have this. We have this area right here that allows us to control things like reflection and specularity, and that's it. So if you look at this little white dot here, the Lambert didn't have that white dot in the center. That's the specular, okay? And if you wanted a formal definition of what the specular was, look in a dictionary. I'm going to give you my definition. It's the reflection of the light source, okay? So on this here, if you look at it, we actually have some specularity right here. It's actually just the reflection. The light's reflecting into this, and we're getting some of that reflection inside there. If I hold up this here, I need to hold it up, but this is also having some reflection of the light sources on top of this, showing that specular. So this is where we can take this, and I could pull the specular color down, and it goes away. I could pull it up, and it gets brighter. I could also play with the sharpness of it, making it very, very tiny and sharp, or very, very big and soft, okay? So depending on if this is a chrome sphere that has a super sharp specular, or a piece of metal that has a super sharp specular, or it's something like my binder here that has a more diffused, a more spread out specular, okay? So if we were to shine a light on this object, the light would be spread out. If we shined a light on something very metallic, that light would be a very hot spot right in the center of it, okay? So again, this is something that we would use to kind of dictate what kind of surface we're dealing with. Then we also have reflectivity, and this is basically just the amount of reflection. So 0.5 is halfway, so we'll get some reflection, and then 0 is none, and then 1 is some, okay? So if I render this out, and I'm going to turn my default light back on. I'm also going to switch this over real quick. There we go. So now you can see that this has some reflection actually added to it. So if you see, there's some reflection. All right. If I pull it up, more reflection. Pull it down, you guessed it, no reflection. Okay. Now, Blinn, just like Lambert, is an antiquated material. It's old. We don't use it anymore. It's again from that same time of tin toy where they were just creating these things and that's all they had, so they just used it. So we don't use Blinn. I typically, when we used Blinn, it allowed us to use to create materials for plastics. So if you look at your, if you look at your sheet here, and I find the word Blinn, there it is. A basic material used for creating surfaces with broad highlights. Okay, really spread out highlights, typically plastics or rubber or that kind of thing. Foam I could use it for also. All right, so close that. So now we're going to right click and we're going to go to assign favorite, and then you can assign a Fong, not a Fong E, just a regular Fong.
What's the difference between the two?
So with the Fong, you'll see that we have very much the same settings on top. Okay, exact same settings. And then on the bottom area here, we have specular shading, but we're now only have two things to control this. We have this cosine power, so broad highlight or sharp highlight. And then we have specular color, no color, or full white color. Okay, we still have reflectivity and we still have reflected color. So this one I would, at the time I would use this, I would use it for metals or reflected objects. Okay? So again, it's not one that we use too often, but I need you to know what it is, because in some companies they will still use these just because they don't need anything fancy, they don't need anything accurate. All they need is something that's quick. And as long as you can use these basic ones and make some quick stuff, then that's fine. But here we're trying to make it a little bit more realistic. We want them to be actual accurate shaders. Okay, so that's what the Fong is. All right, so now what we're going to do is right click and assign a new material. Okay, when we right click and go to assign new material, we get a pop-up box. All right, now does everyone see in the left column where it says mental ray materials? Anyone not see mental ray materials? No. Okay, so we're going to click on the materials under mental ray. And we're going to load in the MILA material. It's the colorful one, like halfway down or halfway up, depending on which way you're starting. Okay. Now the Mila material, what it did was it took us to the attribute editor again, if you had it open, and it brought me to the shading group one and not the Mila material. So I'm just going to click on the other tab. Okay. Now here's what's nice about this material. This material is a mental ray material, okay? The other ones we looked at were Maya software materials. So imagine you're inside Photoshop and you tell it you want reflections. Photoshop can do a very quick way of showing you reflections that is not very accurate, not very pretty looking, okay? So let's pretend that it can do that. But then you want to see pretty reflections, you want to see accurate reflections. So then you load a plugin called Mental Ray, and then you click Accurate Reflections, and now it's going to show you what it would actually look like. But it's going to take a lot longer for that whole thing to calculate. That's what we're doing here. This is just a Mental Ray material. This is a plugin called Mental Ray. If you have Maya on your home computer, you can download Mental Ray for free and put the plugin inside it. And then you can play with this. Now this one is more accurate than the other ones, okay? So some of the stuff that the other materials can't do is when I look at an item like this, there's a certain amount of reflection that hits me right in the front. There's a certain amount of reflection I get on the sides of this, okay? It's different. It's not like there's a constant reflection all the way around. How my camera is seeing this object is changing that reflection. So a Mila material gives us a better view of what that is. It produces a much more realistic result. Okay? Now you'll see that it looks much simpler too. We have diffuse. We have just color. Okay? That's what diffuse means. What color is it? So if I go in here and I pick red, or I pick that green again because that was a neat green. There we go. This is just a flat color. So when I click the render button, I'm going to get very, very simple, just this green color. Okay? Now, I can go back to this and I can add other stuff to it. So if I go to this base component, I can pick from a list. And what it does, it allows me to pick what specific object it is. So let's go to reflective plastic, reflective plastic. That'll work. Okay? So reflective plastic, it gives me a glossy blend. Okay? Which is basically just the amount, like how much glossiness or how much reflection is on this item. And if you look, it's hard to see on the projector. I'm sure on your screen you can see it a little bit better. If you crank that all the way up, you can actually see some reflection hitting around the edges here. Okay? We also have glossy roughness, which I pull this down, it's not rough at all. I pull it all the way up, and it is rough. And what that means, essentially, is if you looked at an item that has a reflection, is it a sharp reflection, like a piece of chrome, or is it a blurred out reflection like this? Okay? If I were to look at my pop here, it is reflecting a little bit inside here, but the reflection is so fuzzy we can't really see it. So it would have a higher roughness than the other one. Okay? Then we also have this IOR, and this is going to be something we'll see throughout several shaders. It means index of refraction, and that's basically how the reflection is bending around the surface. All right. So now if you hit the render button up here, so if you look in your top bar, there's an eyeball with a little clapper. The one next to the eyeball with the clapper, if you click it, what you're going to see is that item that you have selected is gone. Okay? I'm going to switch this back to Maya software, click the render button again, and you'll see that my chair has now disappeared. Because this Mila shader is only a mental ray shader, I have to make sure I choose mental ray as what it renders through. And then what it's going to give me is a more accurate representation of this item. Okay? So just so you can see it, click that render button inside yours. With the glossy roughness down, my reflection is a lot sharper, right? If I pull it up, and then I'm going to do a save image. I'm going to render this. Now that reflection is a lot softer, okay? Now you can also see I'm getting a lot of reflection in the back of this. Okay, just because of that index of refraction, that angle that it's showing me the reflections, I get a different look to it. All right, so this window that popped up, this is our render view. And what it does is it shows us a preview of what this is going to look like when we're all done with it. Okay, all the stuff we do inside here is basically for this render view to look nice. Okay, that's what our goal is. Our goal is that when we click that little render button, that all the stuff we've done is basically pushing it towards a more realistic look. All right, so some of the stuff that's inside here, this far left button is the render button. We click it and it just renders that scene. Okay, so it's the same exact button as this one here. It's just inside the window so we can see it right here. I can marquee an area, so I just marquee like this. And then I can click this button, which is render region. And what that will do is it'll just render that small area, okay, which makes it go a lot quicker. If I change the color of this, and I want to see what that section looks like, I hit that button, and you can see how it renders just that section, okay? That way we're focusing on just this small area and not the entire screen. Because sometimes we click that render button, and it might literally take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, 8 hours. Okay, I've seen renders take a very long time. So we don't want to waste time, so we can do these little render regions. Like, what does this look like? What does this reflection look like? I just draw a box and hit that render view. Okay, so that's a neat, those are typically the two buttons you're going to use most of the time. I also use these, keep image and remove image. So if I want to see what this looks like here, I'm going to keep it. I'm going to make a change. And then I'm going to hit the render button again, just the render the entire screen button. And what this will allow me to do is toggle between the two. So I can compare what did it look like before, what does it look like now. Holy cow, it's green. There we go. So now I can scrub on the bottom to see what it looked like before and after. So I can see if I'm making progress. Some of the changes we do are so subtle that it's very difficult to see what we've done. Subtle, I mean like we're going to, let me change this green back to something more decent. We're going to go to this roughness and maybe pull it down like that. Okay, now that change from us just seeing it flat is not going to be very apparent. Seeing the before and after, it's definitely going to be more apparent. Okay, so I use these two buttons a lot, and I use these two buttons a lot. Okay, all right, so let's close the render view. So what I want you to do now is I want you to go through and I want you to assign a new Mila to every single item. Okay, the Mila that we are creating, it's basically just a definition. All right, so when I right click on an object, I go to assign new material, and I go to mental ray, and I go to Mila, and then I give it a name. Make sure we're naming stuff. Desktop underscore Mila, and then pick on a color. Okay, in a few minutes we're going to go through and assign an actual texture to our item, so we can actually have something besides a flat color. But first I just want colors on everything just so we can see it all first. In your render, in your view here, this button right here that says renderer, if you click on that renderer button right here and change this to legacy, it'll turn everything red. Ignore the red and just know that you've actually colored stuff. That actually lowers the amount of resources being used and may stop your computer from crashing. The other way is just make sure you're saving after you do everything. This is going to be kind of like the repetitive process. Like as you model something, everyone does it in a different workflow. What I like to do is I like to model something, see it, the modeling part all the way till the end, and then just set it off to the side. Then model something else, set it off to the side. Model something else, set it off to the side. And then do all the texturing at once. Now that's my workflow. Now sometimes what people like to do is model and texture as they're going. Okay, companies like ILM, they have people that their job is just to model stuff, where they just say, like for transformers, we know we're going to need car parts, so their job is just to go through and model literally like every car part they could find. When they did a Mustang, they went through and modeled every single part of a Mustang. When they did the Charger, everything. When they did Camaro, everything. They did all of the parts for every single transformer. And every transformer that actually transforms, they're like 98% actual parts. Like that's the actual parts of that car go into transforming into the robot, which is pretty neat. And then they would create these libraries. These guys would just create these libraries, and they would say, we need a muffler. Grab a muffler, drop it into the scene. We need this, drop it into the scene. And it's already modeled, it's already textured, it's already ready to go. All right, so this is just the coloration part. And if I save my scene and I render it, you'll see that we have some very, very basic coloring inside there. Now, this is more like what Tin Toy was, because there wasn't a lot of coloration apart from just flat coloring. Okay, there wasn't a whole lot of texturing done to it. Okay, so like as an example, I don't want this to be brown. I want that to be actually wood. Okay, so I'm going to show how we can assign a wood material to this. There's a website, and you can write this down. Or just take a picture of it with your head. It's called textures.com. Shouldn't be too difficult to remember. So textures.com is free textures, okay? And they have loads and loads and loads of really awesome high-resolution textures. You do have to sign up for an account, but you get 15 free downloads every day.
Is there like a size limit on your
There is a size limit on the free account. There we go. So, but they do have some really awesome stuff. So if I'm looking for wood, you can see 5,000 textures for wood. So if I need a picture of wood, this is a great resource. In the old days, before this website and before like the internet was what it is now, we would have to go through magazines and clip art or go out into the actual world and take pictures of all these things and start cataloging all this stuff so that we can use it. And that was actually a very difficult process, because one of the keys to making this texture look good is making it look flat. So you can see that most of these textures are pretty flat, and then making it look like there's no lighting applied to it. Okay, so if I took a picture of a tree outside, most likely there's going to be a light on this side and there's going to be a shadow on that side. If I tried to use that texture inside Maya, there's going to be a light on one side and a shadow on the other side. So you try to get it as flat and uniform as possible. So once I'm in here, I'm going to go through and try to envision what, if I had this chair in real life, what kind of wood would it be made out of? It probably wouldn't be made out of this, because that's more of like a pallet type wood. Okay, it wouldn't be made out of parquet flooring. It wouldn't be made out of this. Maybe it would be made out of the crackly one. This is obviously too big. So what I like to do is I find a fine wood. These fine wood patterns here are pretty nice. We're not getting super close to it, so we don't need to get something really, really high resolution. But I just like to find something that will work for what I'm doing. Too many divisions here makes it look very fake. So something very flat and boring-ish typically works, but also something that has a lot of detail to it. So something like this, something like that are perfect. There are a couple in here when I click on this. There we go. You'll see that the free one, the small one, is 1 credit. They also have what's called a seamless texture. Okay, so imagine that I had a picture inside of Photoshop of wood, and then I took that picture and I copied it and pasted it right next to each other. If those two ends don't match up, and there's like a line, like an obvious division of where these two things don't match up, then there's a seam. Okay, so for 3D, I might take this picture of wood and I may duplicate it a bunch of times so that I can fill a bigger area. All right, so I'm never going to find a picture of wood for a floor, because it's just, it wouldn't have a picture of every piece of wood on the floor. So we would take something like this and just duplicate it to make it fill the entire floor. So I preview, just so you can see the preview. As I zoom out, that's basically like zooming out that texture. And you do get to a point where you can see like a pattern, but typically you're not looking at it from right above. Okay, typically it's just kind of like a filler. So I'm going to download this texture. So I'm going to hit save this texture, and I'll hit save. And in my downloads folder, there it is, I'm going to cut it, and I need to move it into my folder. So remember, we set up all those folders inside of Maya. Tuesday, Thursday. The source images is where every single picture goes. So if we bring in any texture into Maya, it has to go inside of source images. Okay? All right, so back to Maya. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my chair, hit Control A to bring the attribute editor back up. And what I want to do is, instead of this wood flat color here, I want that picture to be loaded there. So on the far right, we have these guys, these little checkerboards. The checkerboards mean mapping. So anything with a checkerboard, we can map to it. So if I click on the far right checkerboard for color, and I get a list. Okay, this looks very similar to what we saw a minute ago when we assigned our Milas. I want to bring in a file. So I click on File. I'm going to click the folder. Notice how it brings me right into source images, and I can click on that wood. All right, so now I'm going to save again. There we go. I'm going to hit render, and what we should see is my chair, instead of being flat brown, actually has some wood texture to it. And get closer so we can see the wood texture. All right, so now we actually have wood on here. Now for today's stuff, for this mini room, we're not going to be very specific about how it's getting placed. It's totally wrong in how it's getting placed. My texture is actually stretching in some areas, and it just doesn't look very good in other areas. Like this band right here, that looks weird. This looks weird right there. But for now, we're just going to ignore it, okay? Because I just want you to see how to get a file from textures.com and then to drop it onto your stuff. So let me show it again so you can see that process. Go back to textures. let's say I needed something that's wallpaper. Oh, I know. Not wallpaper. I'll wallpaper my room. Painting. This is a fancy room, so I want, of course, paintings on my wall. What? Now, a while ago, they had all these paintings, and they were...
Are they blurred?
Yeah, they must be famous paintings, and they said you don't have the copyright to be distributing those. Oh.
Or it's so people can just like right-click and save as.
No, but even that, you can still...
Yeah, maybe
that's
when you
weird.
download it.
You know what stopped Miniroom is right-clicking and then saving that.
What would? The size. The size that they're showing us is a smaller size. The bigger the file texture, the better the resolution, the more realistic it's going to look. It's also an Asian room, so I'm going to use this one. So I'm going to grab... See, in this one, they get two options. I get the medium at 1600 pixels or the small at 1000. For the stuff we're doing initially, small is going to work. The more realistic we want, typically the bigger file size we want. If you wanted a membership to their site, it's only like $100 for the year. But if you do 3D, you get really, really awesome high-res textures that you would use for everything. All right, so I'm going to go back to my 2510 folder, work, Tuesday, Thursday, source images, and just paste that image inside there. All right. So now I need to put, this is something I'm looking at on my screen. So I'm going to go to my screen here, and what I want to do is not assign that picture to the entire screen. What I want to do is assign it just to that rectangle in the center. So I'm going to right-click and go to Face, grab the face, and then assign a new material right to that face. So there's a new Mila. I'm going to click on the mapper for the color, go to File, go to Folder, go to Oriental Mural. I'm going to save. I'm going to render. And then what I should see is I should have that picture right on top of there. There we go. Beautiful. Okay? So what I want you to do now is on a couple of your objects, bring in some textures and just place them throughout. Okay? All right, so the same process for all of our objects that we're doing here, just adding a Mila and then adding our other stuff. What we're doing this whole time is we're creating definition. So I don't want you to think of a material as a one-off thing that we just do it to this one object and then we never touch it again. We can go back and tweak it. We can go back and play with it. We can use that material on several different objects. So like my picture frames over here, if I render them, you'll see that the three of them each have the same material. So these have like a pink color and these have a green color. So if I wanted to change those, I can grab any one of those, like the yellowy green one, go to the Mila, and it'll change it on all of them. Okay, so if I make that blue, now all the ones that had that material will now be blue. Okay, so if I had 7 cars and I want them all to be the same color, I can grab all the cars and make them the same color. If I want one to be different, I can grab that one, assign a brand new material to it, and then it'll have a brand new Mila to it. All right. Now the options that are inside this box are very different depending on what you want. So don't look at them and think that it's only for that specific item. Like some people might think this reflective paint is like a wall paint. It's not. It's like a car paint. And just so you can see what the car paint one would do, you can see it has stuff inside here like flakes. Okay, so if you looked at a car like one of those old fashioned cars that drive down Woodward, it's not just like a flat color. There's actually like speckles and stuff inside the paint that make it look the way it's supposed to look. And there's typically like a one color on it, then there's like a clear coat, and all that goes into making that image or that car look realistic. Now these aren't going to look like car paint. I'm not going to just drop it on there and it's car paint, but it gets us closer to where we were at, where we want to be. So if you look at these have the car paint material, and you can see it looks definitely different than just the plain plastic reflective material. One of the big advantages to this Mila is that it assigns things, assigns properties based on what our need is. So if we just need reflection, then we can just go down here and just say, okay, it's just plastic, and then we get the reflection properties and color. Or if it's just reflectivity, you can see how we can eliminate all the other stuff there. Or if it's anisotropic, we can add that in there. And as you go through, you'll actually start to play with some of these things depending on what specific item you're doing. So as we do a specific project, we're going to dip into what those other ones will do and where how we can maximize the look of each one of those. Okay, so this one down here that says transmissive clear, this will be more like a glass, but it doesn't mean it's going to look like a piece of glass sitting on a wall. You see it looks horrible. It looks just like a piece of like black glob on the wall. Okay, because it's not really set up to be a piece of glass. Go back to plastic. There we go. Okay. So the next thing that we need to play with here is we need to add lighting into the scene. So right now it's just default. It's just basically whatever Maya feels like giving us. Okay. So you'll see there's no actual shadows in my scene as I'm zoomed out and I'm rendering the whole thing. There's no shadows. My chair right here could be floating for all I know. So we want to add shadows into our scene. We want to add lights into our scene. So under the Create tab, we're going to go to Lights, and we're going to add an area light. Okay, so Create, Lights, Area Light. Because I'm in the default here, just so it doesn't crash. So this is an area light. So I'm in the Move tool, and I just pulled that area light kind of out of the scene a bit, just so it's kind of floating on the other side of my box. And what I want to do is I want to eventually shine this light into the room to give it some illumination. Okay, so we're going to play with this in a second, but I want you to see what this is going to do by default. All right, so right away we're getting some light in the room. Okay, we definitely get light, so we get shadows. All right, the default light doesn't give us any shadows, but this light, because it's a one that we created, it does give us shadows. So you can see in the shadow areas, you see how black that area is right here and how dark this area is? There's no bounce light in here. So if you took like a drawing class, one of the things they discuss is bounce light. You put a white piece of paper under someone's chin or a red piece of paper, that red is going to bounce and fill into their skin. It will not do that here, and that's fine because we don't want it to do that for what we're doing. Eventually we'll get into doing more stuff like that. But we will need to add some other stuff in there. Now the other thing that it's doing is our light is basically starting here and it's shooting a constant intensity, okay? So imagine that we have a light that never dies off. It's just constantly, like if it's 1,000,000 miles away, it's still as bright. So what I need to do is I need to turn some options on to make this light appear a bit more realistic, all right? So if I need to edit the properties of this light, how do I open up those properties? Control A, the attribute editor. All right, so one of the properties is decay. So that's the property I was just talking about. That is, the light is here with no decay. That light intensity just goes on forever. So if there's a cat 6 miles down the road, that cat is just as illuminated as something in front of the light. So we want to change this to quadratic. So change your decay rate to quadratic. Okay, so once I change it to quadratic, watch what my light does now. So right here, that's what my light's doing. With a decay rate of quadratic, the drop off is so sharp that we get nothing. All right, so what I need to do is then take this intensity and crank up the intensity on there. And by crank up, I mean like 500 or so. All right, so type in, you have to type it in because it's not going to scroll, like 500 or so, and then hit the render button. So if I show the area light here a little bit closer, you can see how it has this little stick. That stick is like, this is the direction of the light. So if it points this way, the light's pointing out of the box and not into the box. So we have to make sure, obviously, that we're pointing towards the stuff that we want to illuminate. All right, so now looking at this, you can see we definitely get more realistic lighting because there's a drop off to it. The light at the front of the box is a little bit brighter than the light further into the box, okay? So that makes our lighting seem a bit more realistic. All right, so now back to the area light settings, and you can see how I work. I keep the render view up, I keep my actuator up, and I play with these settings and I constantly just render it out. The lighting, we can kind of see stuff. There's a button here that says lighting, and we can kind of see what it's doing, but we don't get a really good preview, so I typically don't even use it. I only render to see what the actual lighting is going to look like. So this is where we change the intensity to 500. Maybe it's 5,000, maybe it's 6, maybe it's 600, whatever. This value of intensity is always going to be played with. If your scene is enormous, okay, if you created your original cube and your original cube was this big and someone else's was that big, your light intensities are going to be completely different. So you always have to play with that intensity to control where it's at. And it's literally just like, I put 50,000 just so you can see, it's going to blow it out. Everything's going to be white. There it is. That's too much, okay? So then I know hit escape to stop the rendering and then crank it down. I'll just take away a 0 and let's see what 5,000 looks like. Okay, still a bit on the hot side, so I hit escape again. Take away another 0. And then 500 just happened to work out that that's a good value, okay? Now it also matters where that area light is. My area light is right up against that room. It's going to be brighter than if it's really, really far away, okay? So I could change the brightness of this by also moving this closer to my room. Okay, and that'll brighten it up also. So what we're going to do now is after we've set this to quadratic, after we've set the intensity, I'm going to scroll down to the mental ray tab, or mental ray area, and open that up. Okay, so we clicked on the light, we scroll down to mental ray, open up the area light, and we're going to tell it to use the light's shape. All right, and then we just set this high samples to 1. So use light shape, high samples to 1 under the mental ray area. Use light shape, high samples to 1 instead of 8. Okay, so there's 4 things that I always change on a light. I set it to quadratic drop off or decay. I set it the intensity really high up. I set it to use the light shape, and I set that high samples to 1. Those 4 things are going to change the way your lighting works. If you don't do those 4 things, your lighting could look horrible, okay? Now, just so you can see what some of these things do, let me pull this back a bit. And I'm going to put a cylinder in the middle of my room here. All right, so look at the shadow of our light. Do you see how speckly it is here? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so the speckles are coming from the light samples. Okay, we lowered our samples on our light. We told them to be 1 sample. Now what this 1 means is that when we're ready to actually go through our final render, mental ray will take over and smooth all this stuff out. Okay? So when we set this to 1, it's going to look horrible now, but will look better later. Okay? And that's fine because we don't want this preview when we click this button here. We don't want that to take a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes to see what this is looking like. We want this process to go as quick as possible. We want to get as many iterations of what this is looking like as fast as possible so we can start to tweak stuff. If we don't like how our wall is or our framing or our colors, we can change all that stuff really quick. The other thing we're going to look at is how hard the shadow is. So you see how hard the shadow is here? It's basically just completely black. If I take this light bulb and I stretch this out, I'm going to make it enormous, like that. Oops, too big. Shrink you down. And then I re-render this out. What we should get now is we should get a nice soft light in the scene. Okay? Because what Maya's doing is it's using the size of that light. So when we click use light shape, it's using the shape of that light to dictate how big the light source is. So imagine that we had a tiny little light bulb like this that's super duper bright, okay? Our shadows from that light are going to be super hard. But if we had a huge light source, that light source is spreading out the light, it's spreading out the shadows, so we get this nice soft light, okay? Now again, this is still grainy. We don't care because when we do our final render, it will smooth it all out. It'll blend all that stuff in nice and neat. Okay, so I made it as big as this scene. I can get rid of this now. I made it as big as that box because I wanted that to be in there. Another thing that I could do, just so we can see some other options here, is I could rotate this light like this. I can duplicate it, scoot it over, do something like that, and then take this intensity down to maybe like 300. Okay, so what this is going to do is it gives me two lights. Yeah, 300 should be good. The two lights inside the scene are going to act as kind of like a fill light. So where our areas where we had really, really dark spots, it should help kind of fill in those spots there. And because we're hitting it at two different angles, we should get some pretty decent light. So you can see we're getting some nice lighting happening under here. Originally, we didn't get that. Originally, that was completely black underneath and we couldn't see a thing. But now because we have these two lights kind of converging in the scene, we're getting this little bit of fill inside the area. Okay? So make your area lights. Make sure you have those options set. Intensity's up. It's set to quadratic. It's set to use the light shape. And your samples are 1. And they're nice and big. Be up. These things that we're doing right now are the same things every single time we do a material, every single time we do a light. These are common things you're going to do from now until you're done with your 3D. And regardless of what software you're in, if it's Cinema, if it's Maya, if it's Max, if it's any other 3D software, it's going to be exactly the same. They have nearly identical names for all their lights. They might be a little bit different in some of them, but they're very, very similar in what they do. Some of the other lights that are in here, things like point light, spotlight, volume light, those are typically meant for very specific things. So if I had a light bulb, I could use a point light. Pretend that I had a lamp over here. So I'm going to take this light bulb right there. And again, it has a decay. I always want to set the decay on this. But because it's a light bulb, I'll just set it to 50. And what you're going to see is that now I have a light kind of shining over in this area. Okay? And now that I've added 3 lights into my scene, do you see how slow this is going? The more lights in our scene, the slower it's going to go. Do you see the movie Good Dinosaur?
Yes.
Okay. In that movie, for that scene to look nice, some of those scenes have 200 lights that they've used to make it look nice. When they did Nemo, they had hundreds and hundreds of lights all over the place to make the underwater scenes look so realistic. Now this also works if I use a polygon cylinder, would work. Just so you can see some of the neat effects that we can do with this. There, delete. So obviously a lampshade. There you go. And so now what we should get is the little light flare on the top and a light flare on the bottom from our light. Okay? And that's exactly what we get because it's now, because we've set up the lights to act like realistic lights, they're behaving like realistic lights. They're still not bouncing, but that's fine. Okay? Yes, sir?
Could you like thin the material and make it shine through?
Of this?
Yeah.
Yes, we could. Okay. Now there's other stuff, there are certain limitations to it. So to actually get like a light bulb and to have it glow and to look realistic, wouldn't happen right inside the software. Okay, so it's kind of like if I wanted that light bulb to look like it's glowing, I'd bring it into Photoshop and the final image, and I would add the glow inside of Photoshop. Okay, and that would give it more of a look. But I can definitely make this appear to be transparent a little bit. So I'm going to go to a new Mila, and I'm going to go down here to a translucent material, and I'll just see what that looks like. Okay, and this is where that render region comes in, because I can just grab that area and render just that region. All right, so now you can see it actually looks like that whole thing is lit up. That's not what I wanted. Translucent. Let's pull that up. Let's make it a little bit rougher. And sometimes it's just playing with these, and sometimes it's a weird thing, but sometimes it is just like remaking the material, which I don't want to do. There we go. Okay, so now you can see it's looking like it's actually illuminating from the inside of that object. Okay, so a lot of the stuff we can play and play and play with to get the desired results. Now, one thing, just so, because we're on the topic of it, the light bulb doesn't look like a light bulb. This looks like a total like CG light bulb, perfectly rounding up like that. Okay. So just for giggles, I'm going to show you what these things are, which are really, really neat. And our field, this 3D field, is really a, it's organic, it's growing, it's changing all the time. And what we do is always evolving and to make things look more realistic. So what they have are these things called IES light profiles. So companies like GE and any other company that makes light bulbs I can't think of right now, they create these light profiles, which is basically like what does the light look like of that light bulb. So they make these things, and if I go to images and I look at this image here, so I can actually download a texture for my light that will make the light look like this when it shines. Okay, so instead of me having just like a perfectly flat light, I could download one of these and use this, and it'll give me a more realistic light. So just so you can see that real quick, because it doesn't take terribly too long, I'm going to go to download.
Can you change the light color?
You can change the light color too, yes. So if I go here to download the IES profiles, and I save it, and I view my downloads, and I open this, I'm going to extract it all. There we go. All right, so I'm just going to copy this and put it into my folder. And again, because I'm bringing it into Maya, I'm dropping it into my source images folder. There we go. All right. So now back to Maya, back to my light bulb. All right. I don't know. I just Googled it. It was derekjensen.com/3dblog. Yeah, it's just IES profiles is what I go to. So I'm going to go into the point light, and again, certain things have certain options. Point lights have this. No other lights have this option because it's specific to point lights. So down here under light profile, I can just click on the mapping, go to my profile, and pick one of these. So maybe I do pair. I don't know what pair does. I have to look that up. But now when I render this, what it's going to do is give me more of that shape that the pair light had. And my point light, which is essentially a light here, and it emits like a sun, like outward, it no longer does that because now it's more of a light bulb. I could actually change the rotation of it and point it in a certain direction. That's why here, the light's shooting down, not up. So I'm going to take it, hit escape. I'm going to rotate my light bulb 180 degrees like that. There we go. And then I'm going to grab all this stuff and hit the render button. And then what I should get is this nice little shape shooting upwards that looks a little bit more realistic than the stuff we had before. And it does look a bit better than it did before. Now it's not shooting up and down, so I would actually have to duplicate it, rotate one of them downward, rotate one of them up. Typically I use this for more of like torch lamps. So if you've seen those light bulbs or those things that are on the wall that shoot up. That's typically what I would use this for. Okay, but they use these a lot in video games too. And that's why we, when we originally searched for it, it brought up Unreal Engine. So in order for game engines to look more realistic, they use these things because it's very easy. There's no calculation for them. It's just like, there's the light. There's the light. Okay? So lots of stuff we can do inside Maya. A lot of it is going to be tricks. A lot of it is just going to be like, oh, I want this to happen. And then we play with it until that specific thing happens. Okay? All right. So what I want to do now is I just want to save our file. And I want you just to continue playing. Play with making more objects for your scene. Play with adding more materials, play with lights if you need to add more lights into your scene, okay? Next time we're going to go through creating a camera and then rendering it out and putting it into After Effects.